Today, I'll be doing a design review. An up-and-coming designer, Nelson, has submitted some work for me to review, and I'll be going through with some suggestions about how to improve it. I'll be doing my best not to just restyle it or have big opinions on it, instead trying to go through tried and true methods that anybody can follow to improve their own work. We get better together, so let's get started. So first and foremost, a huge thank you to Nelson. That's at Nelson, YOLEMI1. I've had a few opportunities to speak with him and review some of his work. And it's one thing to design something, it's a whole nother to ask somebody to review it. So really want to thank him for giving me this opportunity. He asked if I could review it, I asked if I could record it, and hopefully impart some things that other designers could use. So Nelson, thank you very much. Everybody do check him out on Twitter. What Nelson submitted for review was a design he created for a medical company website called MedPal. So it was kind of gone with a blue color scheme here, a nice soft floating white box type of motif throughout with multiple sections, sort of a overflowing motif with the various people throughout. Nice buttons. And right off the bat, I thought it was a fairly nice design. So it was something that we could sink our teeth into. Was really happy to see it. So a great first pass. But I noticed a few things that I thought perhaps we could review from and that some other designers might find instructive when trying to improve their work. So let's break it down here. So right off the bat, the first thing I thought of was spacing. So I've gone through and kind of listed where I saw it. What I'd like to see would be extra spacing added throughout to make sure that key areas have key focus. Everything has a bit of time to relay their message, relay their purpose, having a bit of space to breathe. So up here, what that looks like is, generally speaking, there's three elements. We have the logo, we have the menu, and then we have kind of the login system. But these two end up being so close together that it almost looks like a mistake. You know, you're going to have some situations where there's so many menu items or other things you might need to find a different design treatment. But because these are so close, it almost looks like a mistake. So we're going to want to make sure that everything is done with purpose. So you can clearly tell which each area is trying to do. Now, I thought from the line height here, I would have liked to see this a little bit closer, these line heights here. So bringing in, if you just see the amount of line height between these two, would feel a little bit tighter if we got that in closer. And then we come down to the buttons here. And what we see here, it's very much the same type of situation. Let me get rid of the box. But looking at these elements, it almost seems like the spacing is perfect, like just three different elements spaced the same amount. Now this play button goes with this wording. So we should have enough spacing between it to clearly delineate that this is a button, one element, and then this is a separate button. Right, so just played like here looks like 1, 2, 3, just as if it's all just one bar, three different elements. Like these two would be two different things. So we want to make sure we're very purposeful with that spacing. Everything's got room to breathe. Now, speaking of that, when something starts to get too close like this, again, it almost feels like a mistake. Like if this was implemented, it's so close to that bottom that it almost feels like someone just added a bit too much margin. So it doesn't feel purposeful. So we'll want to bring that up a little bit, and we'll show that in a second. Now we come down here, I do like to have things breathe, but in this case it almost felt like too much spacing. So if you're kind of leading your eye through and down, and then we come into here, it just feels like it's a little bit too much space. Now these two here, we want to have kind of tight groupings to make sure that everything is together. I'd like to see those a little bit closer. Now, as much like the problem here with it not feeling purposeful or being a bit crowded, if we come in here on this box, you can clearly see how tight these letters are to the side of the boxes. So everything feels really congested. They feel way too crowded. So we're going to make sure there's enough spacing on the side here, a little bit of padding, to make sure that it doesn't feel too crowded within these boxes. So continuing to come on down here. Now these three boxes here gave me a bit of a problem when I was looking at it. So I drew them out to kind of discover what was wrong. What I noticed is that all three of these, 1, 2, 3, all three of these boxes have a different width. Now that's not to say everything has to be perfectly the same width every single time. However, for something like this with the numbers where it's like this number, this number, this number, a treatment where everything is of equal weight could be important. It would be a bit more appropriate in that case. So didn't like that those three were different, was throwing me off visually, and finally figured it out. And same thing here too with just the spacing, much the same problem that we had up here, just being a little bit crowded. You tend to find with kind of newer designers that overcrowding does tend to be a problem. So making sure that everything could breathe and has enough nice padding, so everything feels comfortable, not too crowded. Let's get those boxes aligned there. Now these are just some minor points. Again, just kind of tight grouping of those two and possibly indenting these a little bit. And you'll see the effect. I do have this designed out in a second. Same thing as before. Let's have tight groupings. Everything that's to be together, be read together, have it live together, have it sitting together. So continue to scroll. Now this is very much, in my view, the same situation that we saw here, where it almost feels like a mistake. I really like to see it when things are purposeful, like it's meaningfully together, as if it's very much done on purpose. And the way it was just barely touching was there. Now that could lean a bit more into a personal style taste. So, apply that as you will in your own design. These had the same issues as above. And again, here we're kind of just seeing these vast swaths of empty space, right? I love negative space. I love having stuff that breathes. But sometimes when you get into this case, you can just see these, it feels like almost unnatural the way that this negative space is presented. Come down over here. We have this sentence here, reviews from our patient, and it should be patients. But given the vast amount of space we have over here, would be really no need to have that take up a second line. So why not drag it out and have a look back better? Now, coming down here, this might be, unfortunately, the worst offender, that, in my opinion, from the spacing, because you have a fairly nice mock-up and a big call to action. Like, hey, if you like this app, like, get our mobile. Like, everybody loves mobile devices, primarily the source of internet usage for people. So why not celebrate? Why not have this as a huge, big call to action? And what we see here is that what's seemingly a very tiny phone, and then again, this wrapped text for no particular reason, given how much space we have over here. So you can see with that spacing. Lastly, on the footer, didn't really see much of a column structure. So the spacing here used for the logo seemed similar to this one, but then the other two columns for the menus were just some other random kind of sizing. So it'd be nice to see a bit more structure. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect, as in everything needs to be done in fourths. We can play with those rules, but you want it similar enough that it's kind of telling a story. So that's what struck out. So let's quickly go through and see what that looks like when it's fixed up a little bit. And this isn't going to look vastly different yet, right? So all I did here to resolve it is I reduced the sizing of the menu. I did find this a bit big, which gave us some lenience to be able to reduce it. Reduce the size there, which gives us meaningful space. So we get 1, 2, 3. 3 clearly defined sections and areas. We brought this text together. Reduced this text here and brought it a little bit closer together. Just felt a little bit large, taking away almost from some of the other elements that were on there. I tried here to meaningfully separate the buttons and then brought this up so it just felt purposeful. Like this is supposed to be here and not getting too close to the edge to be seen as perhaps a mistake. So, like I said, subtle changes, but ultimately I think it has a bit more of a professional output. Next, we just kind of brought it up a little bit, and you can see it's not very much. Like, again, I love negative space, and as should every designer, but just enough here to make an impact, to make a difference. And this feels a bit more natural and well placed. Coming down here, I did play with the font and the sizing a little bit to give it a bit more breathing room. I almost still find this crowded the way that I did it. So I think you might be able to have a bit more play to get this even better. Perhaps everything is on 2 lines, but you can still see at very least it's a bit more breathing room, a bit more padding to feel that way. Now for these boxes, it was actually fairly difficult because if you look at the amount of characters, right? Unless you're going to hide the numbers or, vastly try to space things or reduce the size of them, which, you're trying to call these out. These are cool, important numbers. We have this much success. How could we do it? One of my favorite tricks for that actually is to take the character, so if it's a percent, if it's a $sign, in this case if it's a K, and reduce the font size. It's not the most important thing. Like percent, you can see the size of it here, you know exactly what it is, but because we reduce the size, we can really increase the space we have to play with, and that has it sit down nicely. Same with the K. So I just reduced it a bunch, was able to play with it, and next thing you know, 1, 2, 3, we got 3 evenly spaced ones, and just sits down in that box a lot nicer. So again, by way of comparison, kind of look at the other one, right? So look at this, specifically look at this 30K plus and a 98% compared to that 1, 2, 3. Just settles it down a little bit. And again, given that we have this space, like we're the designers, we can make that a little bit longer if it doesn't encroach on anything else. Now for these two, this is really tiny. You do notice that when you're typing in a Word document, the common use of bullets is often it'll be slightly indented. So that's all I've done here. It just tends to read more naturally from how we're used to reading. So here it is kind of just like flat. Let's see if I can grab these out of the way. Seems flat-footed almost in a sense, and we just kind of took those and pushed it a little bit in, calls attention to it, and is a bit more natural to our reading, and brought them together so that they live together. Continued going on, just making sure that all of our headers and subheaders are at an appropriate distance, not crowded, but together to make sure they're read with each other. Snuck in the little check mark so it feels a bit more purposeful. Again, that might err on the side of a style choice, but that's up to your discretion. Same thing there. And again here, we took this opportunity to bring this whole section up so there's not so much dead space in between, and brought this out to 1 line. Was no need really to bring it to 2 lines as it was there. Last thing I did bring this down a little bit. I found that when I was hitting perfectly at the top like that, it just felt a bit too much jammed up. Just gave it a little bit of bringing it down so that it was really living within these items on the left. So if you kind of drew a box out from here, it's going to be right within it as opposed to right on the top. Again, small little parts. And then down here, now left side, the thing that we have noticed here, we've had a pretty good back and forth volley. You see this happening all the time in websites where, photo on the one side, then on the left, then on the right, on the left. Just kind of ends up having this nice flow going down. So it's not the website with the photos and the text itself doesn't look like bullet items, right? Ding, 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 ding. So we'll have it left side, right side, having it flow. To follow that, given that this photo was here, I brought it over to the left side. Again, stylistic choice. You don't necessarily need to do it that way, but I just found since we've had a pretty good ping-ponging kind of effect back and forth, why not continue it? Brought it over, made it much bigger. So call it out, like this is cool, this is interesting, you should really see it. In addition, given the space, didn't need it on 2 lines, and also increase the size of the buttons. If you look at how small that is, given the importance of it and what we want them to do, plenty of space to play around with. So just increase that, made it larger, sits much nicer. And then on the bottom here, I had it so that the left and the right side took up the same and the same in the middle. And even then, I cheated a little bit. These 4 are not perfectly symmetrical, not 1, 2, 3, 4. But at very least, you can kind of see how the middle 2 columns of menu aren't just smashed together like this. We're going to spread it out and use the space a bit more appropriately. So there we go. Good start. We've got the spacing fixed. We've got everything sitting nicely. Let's move on to what I'm calling visual fixes. So let's move on now to the visual fixes. There was 2 kind of primary things that I wanted to focus on for this part. Coming down here, I found some issues from a UI UX perspective with this. Primarily, we have these left and right toggles, but the action itself is actually going up and down. Now, these might not even be necessary, really. You could just have these 1, 2, 3 on a rotating basis. So 1, 2, 3. and not even really need this. Generally, perhaps they would go over that way. Lots of different ways to think about it. As I was doing a bunch of experimentation, and the place I generally found that I like the most, and this is going to really come down to preference. The big thing to take away from this particular design, if this is how it works, would be to play around with how this left and right interacts with the stuff on the left. At very least, this is probably not going to look great, but let me just, for the sake of speed, do that. At very least, going up and down so that the two are aligned. Small point. But instead, one thing I did like, and just to kind of give it a bit more punch and allow them to read, is I thought if we had taken the card of that, so have the card read out this way, and then have it layered. So we have a lot of cool layering going on. So layering is very much a visual motif that's been used within this. So cards sitting on top of one another, everything being layered. Why not continue that with here? And what I'd suggest is have 1, 2, 3. Right? So just have the 3 across and see how that looks. Now here's a quick trick. If you want to really quickly, depending on your grouping and everything else, if especially within Figma, this is a frame which can be kind of dicey when you're trying to move stuff around. If you want to do some really dirty, quick experimentation to see what it looks like, grab a screenshot. Let me just paste it right in. Whoops. Let me get that out of there. Just grab a screenshot of the element you're trying to work with and use that instead. Because what I'm going to do here, like I said, this is just quick and dirty. I'm trying to play around to see what I might like. And if you get bogged down within your Figma systems that prevent you from playing, they're not really serving you very well. So, just for temporary, grab a screenshot and play around with different motifs that you could use. So in this case, I thought it would be a little bit more interesting to have 1, 2, 3, just have like the 3 various cards. Nothing groundbreaking. You've seen this on various websites, and have it go across. And then we could, just take your classic circles, 1, 2, 3. I would expect you to take a lot more time than I am right now on making this look good and lining everything out properly. But just to give you kind of an idea. So I thought, just for a bit of a change of pace, as opposed to having everything left, right, left, right, left, right, use the layering kind of motif that's already been presented through here and have these kind of big cards in the center and have that flow through. The next thing I noticed is something somewhat to do with consistency is if we come down to here and we look at the size of this vignette, this person, this photo, compared to the text on the left side, what you can see is, and I'll take the one from above and we'll bring it across, you can see that the one's much bigger. Now again, I'm not that type of stickler where everything's going to have to be absolutely perfect. In fact, I think when you bend the rules, you get some of the coolest visual effects for sure. But this one, given how often we've been reusing this exact same motif, it felt it could be better served if we had it as the same size, especially given that the amount of text and content here on the left side is really minimal. It's not that much. So what I did on this side is, if we can see for comparison, just took that exact same image and increased the size. So now everything's going to have that same consistent sizing, especially if you look about this square that's up over here. So same exact kind of sizing, and then just reduced it down here on the left side, given there's less content, so that it was going to be a lot more even, a bit more consistent. And then again, just an opportunity to show more photos, show more faces, and try to convey what we're going for here. So continuing along, again, it's not, if you look at the sum of all these changes, it's just little by little by little, we're making a little bit more refined, a little bit sharper, a little bit better. But nothing massive, nothing crazy, really. Okay, let us continue. So, photo fix. If you are working for somebody and they hand you images and they tell you you have to use these photos, you're going to be a little bit stuck. There's some treatments you can do if the photo is of a little less resolution, and certainly make that happen, make that work. The challenge I had here when I was looking at this design file, as we get kind of closer, you just start to notice some of the blurring. Even at what would be considered 100%, it's just not the crispest photo. Now, some of it is because of perspective, because she's holding it. That part is really cool. I really did like that. But it did not feel like the highest quality photo to begin with. Right? And again, even at 100%, like I could just tell when I saw it, it felt a little bit blurry. And given that this is a portfolio piece, something you want to show to people, you want this to be as crisp and sharp and beautiful as possible. You know, you get a much better sense with this one. A little bit of pixelation again here. This one I didn't replace, probably should have. You know, it's a little bit too low quality. You want to be careful with that, especially on a portfolio piece. If anything, you can kind of cheat a bit if it's for a case study or portfolio piece and having it higher resolution than you would for an actual website that has to be concerned with photo size. But you know, you want to make sure that these are just as crisp as possible. It's going to show not well. Now, when it came to this photo, the photo itself's okay. The place seems a bit old. You know, it looks like an older stock photo, right? It's not so much about the age of the people. It's the style of the room that they're in, the style of the photography. It's very flat. There's not a lot of depth inside this photo. And more problematically is, given the photo, there was really no room to be able to get into it and adjust. So too much of her face is really being covered up by this here. You know, we want to be able to see the face. Again, that just feels like a mistake, like a developer made a mistake in how the photo was layered. So the photo was old, but more crucially, its spacing did not work for the confines of this particular box, right? So it just cut off. That's by far the most important thing to be very cognizant of. And then even for this, now this one, so much of this is coming down to style. So you're going to have to find your voice and find what you're trying to convey, work with your clients, think about how to do it. The challenge I had with this photo is that this is not very natural looking. This looks like you found a friend and you told her, hey, can you put on a stethoscope and pose? As opposed to a model or like a real action scene. Just doesn't feel natural, doesn't look convincing. And then, I mean, you didn't take the photo, you're not a photographer, but you chose it. It's part of your style. So the fact that it's not a sharp, well composed, well acted photo reflects negatively on your design. It lowers the quality. So what photos we choose is incredibly important. So let's look at how I resolved it. Now this photo here I actually found from Pexels, Pexels. That was an excellent photo, much higher quality, cut out very nicely. I get the real shame is like this action. If this photo exists somewhere in higher quality, like that's a really cool action that she's reaching out to the viewer. Kind of nice. At very least, this person's still engaged. She's speaking with you. She's working on her notes and looking at you. And it's a much higher quality photo. So I believe serves the brand better. Looking at it as I review today, I would have wanted to change this photo. Did not do that, but again, I probably suggest there at least a higher quality version. And here we go. So if you can see the difference here, where I found a photo that had a bit more space to play with, and I was able to move them off to the side, so we can still have this great layering, this like multiple depth and area of it. It's a clean photo, it's in a doctor room, but the focus of who's inside the photo clearly able to be seen. So we're not blocking any important information from it. Now this one too. Now this gentleman here just seems natural. He's smiling, he's engaged. We have lost the kind of like pointed staring at the screen, engaging the user. So that is gone, but this clearly just kind of sits nicely. This actor is a lot more comfortable in this photo, and, you know, natural smile, you know, sets you at ease. You can kind of see the difference between a sort of difficult model pose versus just someone who's acting much better. It's a weird thing to say. It's not so much, what's great with color theory is it's science. This color mathematically goes with this color. Now, when it comes to photo, this is a good photo versus this is a bad photo. That's just experience, it's taste that you get to learn. But, you know, you really need to think about, is this of high quality? Would I see this in a Nike ad? Would I see this in, you know, pick any huge brand online? Would I see that in an Airbnb ad? Or is it a little bit off? Does it serve it? Is it ill-equipped for the space that I have? And am I blocking something? at the very least, you can apply some critical thinking to it to improve the photos. So improve that. It's had this one here too, but I just kind of prefer the smiling and engaging felt more in line with what we were trying to do. Now, for a couple extra options, I'd found this photo too. I did like that the doctor in this case was using the phone. So, and especially since we do have a mobile app for this application, did kind of like it as well. Again, just another cursory search. We were able to find like another photo option for it. Don't think I had anything else. That's right. Now, this was a photo trick. So to apply a bit more depth, so there is this motif that's been kind of applied with this blue. And I do have another thought on that a little bit later. But that's certainly a motif. It's flat, so it's stark. So you have these nice models up against, like real life models against vectored flat shapes. Very cool. Like that style for sure. If you did want to almost soften things in a way and provide a bit more depth, having a bit of a photo background to it is an excellent idea. And the trick that I like to use for that is, if you don't know what photo to have, you'll notice it is this exact photo with this person. Do the cutout to have them perfectly, but then take that same background photo and add a tint, whatever kind of color you're going for. So that person is still in the natural environment. It's just that she's cut out, or he. And then you have like that's the slightest bit of depth. And you can almost make this blue up to like 90-95%. So you can barely see it, but it just gives it that little bit of touch of the real world, a little bit of extra depth. Now, again, this is very much a style decision, not so much this is how UI is done. So grain of salt, you figure out your style, figure out your motif. I just want to throw it in there as an option, that to give it a bit more depth, an option to consider for that. Okay, we are getting close to the end. Now, the last part I did want to mention is around the idea of following through on a motif or a visual style. So we're determining the style language of this website. And per the first versions, we have this circle. My circle, kind of stark imagery, looks great. You will notice that like, as we go down through, so circle, going through the entire website, circle. Those are the only two instances of that circle. So the only time that we've mentioned the circle is like there's once at the beginning, and it's once again at the bottom. So in that kind of sense, it feels almost like a throwaway. Like we had this once just to help this treatment with this main banner image, but we never got back to it. We never did it once again. And it feels like a wasted opportunity or something that wasn't thought through quite enough. We want to kind of establish a brand and a motif and an idea, and then just have it permeate throughout so that we can have this strong brand presence on every page that we kind of get through. So I had two ideas that one could consider for that. So one would be, and this is something I've used often myself, but and you have to really work with a developer on it, but just take that shape, for instance, and have it repeat throughout the design. And in this case, it's kind of nice too, because on the web browser, you can have them bleed off to the edges. So it just slightly encroaches. It's very soft. It's in the background, so everything goes over top. But you can see how we have this circle on the top, and then throughout, there's just these little hits of the circles. So we're continuing the motif. So especially this part right here, I thought worked particularly well with that motif. So we are transitioning from one to the other. So you can see how it's helping kind of the flow and to bring us through. We're transitioning from one to the other, and this circle's kind of interjecting very softly, very much in the background with this stuff on the right. So it's just a soft, subtle hint, but it's just allowing us to take this motif, this idea, and have it permeate throughout the entire design, becoming part of that language. So that shape is not just this one-off, here's a circle, off you go. Now, lastly, the other thing, now that got me thinking, if we do look at this logo, so it is just a square with nice rounded corners put onto a side, so diamond. What if that became the shape? There's many places where we were using the square version of that, but it was on its side. What if we take that? We take the brand of this particular logo and say, this is our mark. This is our identity, and it's going to go throughout the entirety of the website to reuse it, making every shape meaningful in that it's a connection back to the brand. So we take that shape, and now it is the shape behind the professional here at the top. We scroll down, same thing. It's very much the same concept that was before, but now every single time it's just that subtle nod back to the brand. Subtle nod back to the brand every single time. So made it work with all these individuals. And sorry, I can't help myself but show a little bit of a tip. So this particular photo, for your final, you're going to want to work within Photoshop, get it to fit as you're supposed to. But I'm doing this quickly. I'm trying to see if it's even worth touching anything. The shape was not good enough. This photo was not big enough. So take a rectangle, take the eyedropper tool. Let's say it was this like dark green, right? Take this rectangle tool, put it right just at the very edge where you need to extend it, and just connect it up. It's not perfect, but it gets you out of the woods, so you can just kind of quickly like snap trick to be able to extend a photo to see if it's even going to work as you're going to play it. It's about quick tricks to fuel your creativity and ideas, so you can just kind of quickly get through some things. But again, so we've taken that diamond and now we're permeating it throughout the entire design to continue to call back to the brand. Keep making brands. You see here, our nice gentleman down below, and finally ending off with this. I will say it, because of the angles of the phone, I actually didn't like that diamond as much. I'd almost like to see probably cheat a bit and squish it. But you certainly get the idea. And then, bam, there's a logo. There's that shape again. We're just slamming it home the entire time, making it very obvious as to why we're doing it. The last thing I will say, and as best if I understood it, this project is a personal portfolio piece. So this is just a case study. This is a design exercise. And accordingly, that means that we have control over everything. This blue is okay. Challenge with this blue for me is this looked very much like default browser blue. So if you just take an HTML document, throw it up online, that's a hyperlink blue. It's kind of flat blue. It looks ultimately kind of basic. Basic or not well thought out necessarily. And again, I'll be careful with this. Again, that's very much a stylistic choice. As far as what the blue is, but it just hedged too much towards what you would call basic browser blue. And it doesn't speak very well it doesn't work as well in the design to look refined. So my slight suggestion for changing that would be is if you do, I had chosen this blue here. Let's go here, using the Figma style throughout, and I'd put it all in this design. So if you do take more of you add a bit of gray into that blue, it's just going to have it sit down a little bit more. I could probably even go a little bit darker with that, so it's a bit more visual. But you'll just find that it tends to increase the quality a bit as opposed to basic stock blue. The basic RGB, red, blue, and green, if you just take that blue and put it in, it feels less purposeful, as opposed to, just shading the blue one way or the other to kind of get this. So very subtle, but if you have complete control of this as the design exercise that you're doing, you can certainly do that. We'll compare that to the original. So that about wraps it up. So as I said, we had a really great starting point. And again, I really want to thank Nelson for giving me the opportunity to design this and review it. But as you can see, you start out with a really great baseline. We just better made the spacing. We made sure that everything was intentional. We found ways to bring the certain concept or design elements constantly throughout. We want to make sure the flow was great. Fonts were a little bit tighter. Everything was purposeful, no accidents as far as kind of covering faces. Everything else, make sure that the UI and UX makes sense as far as like a left-right versus up and down, as it was kind of displayed here. Making best use of space and really kind of blowing out important parts, not letting too much negative space take hold. So as you can see, it's just piece by piece, bit by bit, you can kind of just keep applying subtle refinements and do your best to improve any design that you have. I hope that was helpful, and I hope that you reach out again if you would like to have your design reviewed. I would love to do so. Just find me on Twitter at Alexander Trevor. Send me a message, send me the design you'd like to review. I'd be very honored to have a look at your design and do the same thing as we all become better designers together. Hey, cheers to your beautiful work.